So, biology is a really large topic. I mean, it's the study of life. And so, scientists have created these different organization levels, essentially a way to break down biology into smaller pieces and ways to kind of classify biology a little bit differently. And when scientists talk about their research, they typically mention these key terms that you'll see here. They'll talk about, oh, I'm an ecosystem biologist or a population biologist. And these different levels help to kind of characterize what exactly they're studying, because again, biology, very large topic. So in this list of organization levels, it goes from the highest to the lowest. So our biggest classification is the biosphere, and we'll talk about each of these individually. Next step down would be an ecosystem. This is probably a term that you've heard of before, as well as community and population. These are words that we use kind of, out in the real world, whether or not we apply it to biology. And then finally, our lowest level of biology is a multicellular organism. So essentially studying an individual species, looking at, in this example, a bison or even a human. So let's talk about each of these individually. So we'll start from the largest, talking about the biosphere. Now, although you have the definition in front of you, we can actually break down this word pretty easily. So bio, just like in biology, means life. And sphere means sphere, so it's referring to Earth as a whole. Particularly, though, the parts of Earth where life is. All of Earth is not inhabited. If you think of the furthest reaches of the poles, or even internally in Earth, life isn't found there. So someone who studies the biosphere is really looking at everywhere on Earth that organisms live, whether it's animals, plants, fungi, or bacteria. Now, someone who is a biosphere biologist might be studying, say, climate change. That's something that affects the entire world. Or maybe ocean acidification. Although that only studies oceans, oceans cover a good proportion of our Earth. So scientists at this level are studying, how does the atmosphere affect the land and how does the ocean affect the land, and really, really big systems. Going to the next level down are ecosystems. Now, what an ecosystem actually is, we all kind of have an idea of what an ecosystem is. It's a collection of organisms, so plants and animals, and very, very important, and their interaction with the environment, with the world around them. Now, there's two major components of an ecosystem that we see in this definition. So one component is that collection of organisms. These are considered biotic factors or biotic things. Biotic, see that root bio, means life. It's referring to living things. So we're talking about our plants, our animals, mushrooms, bacteria. Anything living in the ecosystem is considered biotic. But we also have this interaction with the environment. That portion of an ecosystem is considered abiotic. These are things that are needed for life, but they're not living. So, for example, water. Water is essential for life, but water isn't alive. But we still care. I mean, as biologists, we want to know areas that have water and don't have water. Thinking about nutrients. If you're a plant, very important to rely on nitrogen and phosphorus nutrients in the soil. Also, other things maybe not directly ingested, but used, such as shelter. So thinking about caves, for example. And then also if you're a plant, and even for animals as well, is sunlight, the availability of sunlight. Thinking about as we get closer to the poles of Earth, there's less sunlight in parts of the year and more sunlight in other parts of the year. That might affect what organisms you find. Now in these three pictures, I have three different types of ecosystems. And what I could do on a test is I could ask you, identify biotic and abiotic factors in these ecosystems. So for example, here we have a desert. The biotic things we can see, we have some trees. Now, although these are dead trees, they were living. An abiotic factor is something that never had life. Water was never alive. But these trees, although they're dead, they are biotic. They were living at one point. It looks like there might be some grasses or bushes in the background still alive. Although we can't see them in this picture, I'm sure there are tons of bacteria in here which are living things. But some abiotic factors would be things like this sand, these rocks in the background, the temperature. So in a desert, the temperature, again, not living, but something incredibly important for life. Here we have a tropical rainforest, tons and tons of plants in this picture, tons of biotic things, but we also have this water. This water is an abiotic factor. This looks like some sort of sinkhole or, I don't know, some sort of rock formation. Those rocks are incredibly important for a growth of a lot of these plants. And then finally here we have lots of lichens, which is a fungus algae hybrid. Maybe some small bushes and shrubs, but some abiotic factors would be, say, the snow or those mountains in the background. So all really great examples of ecosystems. The next step down is a community. Now, a community is only the biotic components of an ecosystem. We no longer worry ourselves about the abiotic factors. We don't, I wouldn't say care, but we don't, measure temperature and sunlight and water. What we're really interested in is the interactions of different species in this ecosystem. So in an ecosystem, we cared, how hot is it? How does that affect the organisms that live there? How much water does this place get? Can that support plants? In a community, we're more interested in how do these different organisms relate to one another? How do they work together or not work together? So in this example, another type of question I could ask is, identify the community in this picture. So really, you're just identifying everything that's alive. So here we have zebra and wildebeest. We have a lot of different trees, and then grass is covering the entirety of this community. Now, as a community biologist, you might be interested in, how do these zebra and wildebeest interact with one another? In this case, maybe they're competing. They both want to eat grass, and so they're kind of fighting over this resource. Or between the zebra and the grass it's eating. Well, grass is a living thing, so more or less, this zebra is like a predator to this grass. So communities, you're looking at the relationship between, different species in an area. Going to the next level down, populations. So we use the word population kind of every day when we talk about the human population. And that's actually very similar to how we use it in biology. A population is a group of members of the same species. So communities, we're many different species. A population, we're only interested in one species. So here I have a herd of zebras. Plants, again, part of a population. So here we have a population of trees, or here a population of lions. Now, someone who studies population biology is kind of interested in the dynamics within that population. For example, lions. You might have someone who studies like the alpha lion, the Mufasa of the lion pride. How does that lion get chosen? Which lions in this pride are responsible for hunting? Which ones rear the young? When do they reproduce? So they're asking more about that species, but the interactions that happen in that species. We're also interested in how does that population grow or decline. And in environmental biology, this is incredibly important. We look at this a lot. Are lions doing okay? Are we hunting them too much? Are their numbers going down? These zebras, when are they migrating? Are we as humans affecting that? So really important questions that we ask at this level, really related to environmental biology. And then last but not least, you have an individual organism. I have here multicellular, so here we're looking at organisms with many cells. So we're not really looking at bacteria anymore. Bacteria, for the most part, are single-celled. So in the pictures I have here, you have, say, a baboon. This is a balboa tree or a cheetah. A human, really any species you could think of is important. Now, someone who studies at this level is more of looking at how does that organism work? How does, this monkey, how are its arms shaped to climb trees? Or how are the legs of a cheetah adapted to run really, really fast? Or with plants, what is the function of the thorns on this plant? And humans, what does our stomach do? Or how do we get nutrients from our food? So you're more of looking at how is the body doing things. Now in environmental biology, you may think, okay, why do I care why a cheetah can run fast? Well, we are changing organisms purposefully so we can actually do genetic engineering, but we're also changing organisms because of what we as humans do. For example, in Africa, there's a really big poaching problem, which we'll talk about, of elephants for their tusks. And, elephants with really large tusks, they usually are killed and their tusks are removed. What's really interesting, though, is that more and more elephants are being born without tusks. So the elephants with really, really large tusks get killed, whereas the ones that have smaller tusks or maybe no tusks, maybe it was just a mutation where they ended up with no tusks. Well, those organisms are getting, the big ones are getting killed, whereas the ones with small tusks or no tusks are living. And they pass those genes to their offspring. And what we're seeing is that these elephants more and more don't have tusks, meaning they're not getting killed by us, by humans. So we as humans actually affect, individual organisms and how an organism grows and develops. Now, not all species are experiencing this, but some definitely can. So again, as a summary, the largest biology organization level is the biosphere. Then the next level down is an ecosystem, which looks at living and non-living things. We then go to a community, which is just living things. Then to our population, which is looking at just one species, whether a plant or an animal. And then finally to our multicellular organism.